This is going to be very short, just concluding comments. And I'm really up here to make a pitch for the Creditors' Rights Coalition. But before I do that, I do want to take about 3 or 4 minutes to go over what I see as the themes throughout today's presentation and symposium. Because one of the most interesting things to me is when you put together a set of panels like this, each of the individual panels and panelists work together. So, you know, the current events panel, they all met and they discussed things. But each of the individual panels don't talk to one another. So when you end up with lots of different presenters, like Marc talking about the markets, and then Ed Altman talking about the markets, and you get these concurrent themes, it really actually is what, to me, delivers the most value. So, you know, just to start at the very beginning, it seems plain to me that everyone agrees that we're in a pricing situation where things are overvalued. People are looking at differentiation of markets. They're trying to figure out where to put money to work, how to deploy capital, but no one up here is really saying that the publicly traded markets are of particular interest. And if you listen to, say, Marc Lasry saying it's going to be 6 months to a default rate, or that it's going to take a while, and Ed Altman's data to see whether we're in a recession in 6 months or later, it's a pretty consistent theme that we are in a period of uncertainty here, but no one really knows. It doesn't know whether it's going to be really bad or it's going to be okay, which is a little bit different than what we've seen in the optimism in prior years. A second recurrent theme here is that the market for hedge funds and for distressed special investors has changed dramatically. We are no longer in the early innings of direct lending. We are no longer talking about, well, is private credit going to be a big deal? We have the entire business model at, say, Avenue, which was a historic distressed investor, now being 90% direct lending. You have a discussion here, which was absolutely fascinating, about IG and high yield liquidity that didn't even talk about syndicated lending. The syndicating lending didn't come up until the last panel on the loan markets. It was such a small amount, and there's been such gross disintermediation of banks through direct lending that even in the panel that we were talking about, high yield and IG, it didn't even come up to talk about syndicated lending. And when we were talking about systemic risk, I think it's like music. What wasn't said and the pauses are more important than the notes themselves. The systemic risk really is an afterthought in a lot of these presentations. And I think that's where something we all ought to focus on. I do agree on the banking side that there's not a whole lot of systemic risk in ownership, but are the marks correct? Everybody was asked the question and nobody has an answer. What will happen in liquidity? We don't know if there's liquidity. Is there a high yield trading market for private markets? We don't know. And so there was a remarkable amount of consistency there. When we got to the LME panels, we're not in the early innings there either. We're in the late innings. LMEs are completely normalized, as are cooperation agreements and third-party financing agreements. Everyone was focused on business solutions. Unlike prior years, and comparing panels year to year is also kind of interesting to me. Unlike prior years, there's not a lot of focus on legal issues. CERTA came up, and maybe a couple of other cases, American Tire, things like that. But for the most part, it's very different than a lot of the other LME presentations that we've had in prior years, where you're worried about how things are going to work out. Everyone up there was more concerned about business, was more concerned about how you'd price those sorts of LMEs, not about whether they were allowable or not. And I also noticed that there was a lot of emphasis that the 51% non-pro rata LME is back in fashion. Last year when we did this conference, everybody was talking about how you had to go non-pro rata, and you had to go pro rata, and that non-pro rata was too risky. But even after CERTA, the business judgment here seems to be try to get 51%, try to maximize that value. The other thing that I noticed in the LME panel, which didn't come up until the loan panel, is all the discussion about DQ lists, blacklists, and whitelists, which came up heavily in the loan panel. But I'd say with respect to these LMEs, that's going to be really important too. And then we got to the hot topics on credit restructuring, which I thought was a fantastic panel. I want to make one comment here, which was how David Hillman opened up that panel. And he said he's going to talk about LME adjacent issues. And I want to just point out how crazy that is. Historically speaking, we are talking about things like roll-ups, and we're talking about rights offerings and backstop as the original LME. That's exactly what it was done in the context of a bankruptcy process. And when the LMEs first started, you're talking, say, a decade ago, but really about 5 or 6 years ago, those were adjacent to court restructurings. The analogy was to a court restructuring. Yet we had a panel up here that is talking about old things that were being discussed decades ago as being LME adjacent. And it's a really big change here in terms of how all those issues are being thought about. Absolutely fascinating. And I thought also in that panel, the discussion about public policy versus contract respect was really something that they got into and almost ended right before it got the most interesting part, which is, are contracts that involve loans or bonds unitary and can't be broken, or can a court actually, for public policy reasons, say, well, anyone can bid on the backstop. Anyone can talk about a roll-up. You have to open up that to third-party financing. I think those are going to be some interesting issues. So now to the point of where I'm really supposed to be. I'm on the Creditor Rights Coalition. I'm an advisory board member along with Dan and Evan Letterman and Steve Krause. And we're now 2,800 strong. And the 2,800 is incredibly high quality. You're talking about people who have been in the credit community for years, along with a lot of very new people who are very invested in this and are participatory. It is comprised of investors, that's buy side and sell side. It's comprised of advisors, financial advisors, of legal advisors. We have academics, many of them who are in the room today. We have funders. We have people who are involved in publishing information about the bankruptcy space and in the credit space in general. And so it's very widespread, and it comes at things from a lot of different angles. We have curated weekly content. Many of you get our emails. If you don't, please sign up, creditorcoalition.org. That curated content, emphasis on curated. Anybody can throw everything into your inbox. The important part is not throwing everything into your inbox. And so we try to get in front of you what's really important and show links to things that you might want to click through and look at. Our original content, I think, is really second to none at this point. We have Creditor Corner, and we pose questions to different people who are members of the Creditor Rights Coalition on a regular basis to talk about issues that matter to our core organization. And they write about it, and they write about it not in a way that has to show up in the ABI Journal or something that has to be in a piece that's longer or can't be just open and honest, but can be in a short, digestible form. And it's about topics that we're interested in, but we're also open for topics that you're interested in. So solicit, come to us and say, hey, how about writing about that? And then finally, we held things like the symposium, or we hold different in-depth conversations with people. Like this is, we have Women in Credit Month this month, and we're going to talk about how basically being in credit community it can be difficult, or there can be different challenges for the women who are involved in that community. So it's about process as well as substance. So I encourage all of you to please sign up for the Creditor Rights Coalition. Participate in it. It's an active 501c4 corporation, and we're here for social welfare. Social welfare in this case means for promoting the transparency and accountability of the credit markets, and that's what we really want to do. We advocate for it. We can advance for this community those things which are necessary to promote the welfare of this community. So thank you all for attending. This was a great, I think the best conference that we've put on. The quality was second to none. And enjoy your Fridays and weekends. Thank you.